Welcome to Rainbow Hospice Care's dedication of the 2019 Memorial Quilt. We're so glad that you have joined us in this dedication event as we reveal to you the quilt that you participated in creating as a memory and honor of your loved one. We are so sad that this again has to be a virtual event. We want you to know that at the very end of the program, we are going to be doing a slideshow, and the slideshow is going to have a close-up of each of the quilt squares so that you can have a chance to see the square that you created in the quilt. And I promise you, this pandemic is going to end. And when it ends, we want to invite you here to Rainbow Hospice Care's Inpatient Center in Johnson Creek, where the quilt will be on display. You'll find the quilt on the lower level of the Inpatient Center right outside the volunteer office. We present to you the 2019 Memorial Quilt.
Brent Burkhoff, the founder and president of the Rainbow Hospice Care Volunteer Club, shared with us the meaning of the quilt. Throughout history, Americans have used the art of quilting for many diverse purposes: to keep warm, to decorate their homes, to express political views, to tell stories about themselves and the cultural history of a particular place and time, but especially to remember loved ones. Quilts tell stories of love and loss, hope and faith, tradition and new beginnings. They are documents of living history chronicling the lives of generations. These quilts presented today remind us that we are a community, and as a community, each individual person matters. Together we share our joys and our sorrows, but in doing so, we remember the legacy left by our loved ones. As we look upon these quilts, we remember their struggle and their rejoicing, the work of their hands, and the gifts of their presence in our lives. We are reminded that life is precious and often too short. Quilts tell stories, and stories define our lives. They help us to make sense out of what seems at times to be chaotic and an unjust world. Together, the blocks remind us that we are not alone, that others share with us in our grief, sadness, and sorrow. Today is about remembering, and in doing so, we place our loved one in our heart. We remember how they shaped our lives and how we in turn shape the lives of our loved ones surrounding us. We are connected, each one of us, by a bond of love that extends beyond our imagination. So when you leave today, remember that this was not just a ceremony of memorial, but a treasured space where we shared the gifts of our loved ones with each other, where we connected in love and learned that a quilt is not just a quilt. A quilt is a reminder of a love that was shared and continues on in our hearts and minds, is shared in the stories we tell and in the lives we touch. My hope for you is that these quilts will forever remind you, your family, and the community of your loved one's presence in the world.
Deborah Miller. Debbie's family, friends, co-workers were in her heart. Her love for others and her giving to others defined her. Her grandchildren were her life. For Debbie, everyone became family and were worthy of her attention. Debbie is known for how she loved people. Robert Boyd. Robert purchased and paid for 2 farmsteads in his lifetime. The farm pictured on the quilt is the first farm he purchased from his grandfather in Waukesha County. Robert always kept that picture and was very proud of this beginning to his farm ownership. William Hammer. Bill and his wife Lorna had 3 children. Each child had 2 daughters. Bill's granddaughters were his life. And according to Lorna, his wife and grandma to the girls, they could do no wrong. They are his legacy and how his memory lives on. Isa, Aaron, Zoe, Casey, Emma, and Courtney. Eunice Acketts. Eunice was born and raised in Wisconsin, was 100% Irish, and she and her husband loved their time and friends in Arizona so much that they became full-time residents for most of her final 30 years. Joanne Hilby. Joanne loved to collect collections, toys, matchbox cars, precious teddies, baskets. Her favorite collection was of Hummels. When she had her grandchildren overnight, they were given tasks, and granddaughter Brianna's task was cataloging all of the Hummels purchased in the past year. The design featured on the quilt was one that spouse George bought for Joanne. This one was their favorite, as it was an expression of how much they were in love with each other. When Joanne was a child, she was a climber and loved to climb trees and silos. Carrie Beek. Carrie and her husband Dale raised a family together. Dale was a home builder and drove school bus, and Carrie was a housewife. They were dependable and devoted to each other and their family. David Miller. Gone fishing.
Norbert Bud Holtz. Bud, husband, father, grandfather, great-grandfather, veteran, educator, volunteer. Bud's life was rich with friends, family, faith, and sports. Bud was an industrial arts teacher and coached as many as 5 sports at the schools where he taught. He traveled to Ecuador, Uruguay, Guatemala, Panama, and Vietnam to teach them how to teach industrial arts and to help them build technical schools. He was a devoted record keeper, listing every book he read, every trip he took, every item from Twice as Nice that he repaired. Bud was a very kind, loving person, and the thing he disliked most in life was hurting someone's feelings. Bud made his impact at home again, where he spent the last years of his life. The staff grieved for Bud, and Bud, after his death, orchestrated one final gesture of kindness, having a meal catered in for the staff. Kathleen Arnold. God grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change. This line opens the Serenity Prayer, a prayer which is recited at the beginning of every AA meeting. Kathy was a proud and active member of Alcoholics Anonymous community. She was sober for over 30 years and described herself as a recovering alcoholic. Kathy was a 7th grade English teacher for over 40 years, teaching 3 generations of families in Jefferson. Kathy had an enormous impact on many in Jefferson. Feisty and stubborn, if you didn't want to hear the truth, then you probably didn't want to talk to Kathy. Alta Kotwitz. Alta loved cardinals and loved collecting them and wearing them. She was a wonderful mother. She was lost to her daughters for many years due to Alzheimer's. Even though Alta stopped knowing, her daughters continued to know and celebrate and love their mom. Edward Joseph. Passionate about the outdoors, Ed enjoyed hunting and fishing. He also enjoyed country music and watching the Packers, Brewers, and Badgers. He refinished and repaired chairs and sewing machines. Ed passed on the gifts of preparing pancakes to his grandchildren. His witty remarks, known as Edisms, will live on in his sons. Ruth Shire. Ruth used to feed hundreds of hummingbirds at their cabin. She loved her dogs, Buddy and Max. The top picture is of Ruth at a fundraiser she organized for someone who needed support. It's an appropriate capturing of Ruth because she cared deeply for others and devoted a lot of time sewing and crocheting items for premature babies, cancer patients, and disabled veterans, and working for those who had need. Helen Lucht. The cardinal on Helen Square was drawn and colored by great-granddaughters in Juneau, Alaska. Helen loved cardinals, collecting plates with cardinals, wearing cardinal sweatshirts, and watching them. Forget-me-nots are the Alaska state flower where some of Helen's family lives. Joel Braunschweig. The photo was taken at a Cubs game. Joel was a lifelong Cubs fan and enjoyed going to games, watching them play on TV, and listening to the games on the radio. He really enjoyed baseball and especially his favorite team, the Cubs.
Marilyn Boyd. Marilyn loved to crochet. She crocheted the doily on the square. She taught many others to crochet as well. She loved hummingbirds and enjoyed going to her son's house to see all the hummingbirds in his yard. Ruth Cole. Ruth was born in Canada. She loved to play broomball and hockey and loved to ice skate. She took up golf later in life. She was homecoming queen, and everyone was drawn to her. She was drawn to everyone else and took an interest in them. Ruth taught Sunday school to middle school girls for 50 years. Ruth had lots of friends, and her Fab Five group enjoyed traveling together. Joan McVeigh. Joan was married to spouse Jim for 69 years. They met through Jim's sister because Joan needed a date for prom. Jim said, "Her blue eyes melted me." Jim's advice for a good marriage? Every night we kissed goodnight. Their 7 children described their mother as very loving, sweet, caring, and wonderful. Helen Witt. Helen's quilt square of a little girl with cats captures who Helen was. Helen was sprite, lively, and a lover of cats. Donald Arndt. Husband, father, grandfather, friend. These roles of relationship capture who Don was. Dependable. He was a rock for the people he loved. Don was also an accomplished woodcarver, and even as he transformed wood into beautiful objects, his presence made life more beautiful for his loved ones. Glenn Green. The photo of Glenn featured on the quilt was taken by Glenn's brother when they were muskie fishing. He loved that shirt and he wore it all the time. He loved to fish. Lorraine Getch. Trust in the Lord with all your heart. Lorraine also had a stone by her home with these words. It was her message to others. She always looked for opportunities to share her faith. She was unashamed and unafraid to do this.
James Hampton. This picture represents Jim at his very best, celebrating his daughter's wedding. His family, his wife, children, and grandchildren were his happiness. Jim was a husband, father, papa to his grandchildren, brother, uncle, friend, an avid golfer, an engineer, an artist, and a Brewer fan, but mostly he was beloved. Bernard Chaput. Ben's 13 grandchildren's fondest memories are of Grandpa coaching them to water ski. The family's best memories are on Whitewater Lake. Ben was a slalom water skier and lifeguard. Granddaughter Chloe drew the picture, and daughter Julie completed the embroidery. Marion Knack. Marion was a very loving, forgiving mother, always there for her family. Their favorite saying at bedtime was the one stitched on Marion's quilt square. "Love you to the moon and back." It became a game to have the other person make it a bigger gesture, adding the stars, etc. Looks like daughter Kathy got the last word on her mom. Elsie M. Oltman. Elsie loved her daughter-in-law Diana's dog. The dog gave her comfort. Elsie was a feisty, proud German lady who was proficient at everything she did: sewing, knitting, crocheting, cooking, and gardening. Beverly Ebert. Mother, grandma, great-grandma. These roles were the joy of her life. She was dedicated to and big on her family, especially her great-grandchildren. On her wall, she displayed a picture of Jesus as well as pictures of each great-grandchild. As she prayed for them, she was claiming that Jesus was watching over them. She loved her family well. Lucille Noakes. Lucy played piano for her church and loved music her entire life. As she neared the end at the inpatient center, our volunteer harpist was playing, and Lucy, even as she was dying, responded to the sound of music. She loved the color red, and her son can remember her wearing her favorite red Winnie the Pooh sweatshirt. David Lau. This photo is of the last flight David took in his T6. David was a pilot and active in the EAA, serving on its board up until his death. On this day, the EAA Vice President Sean Elliott had flown down in the T6 that David had donated to the EAA. They had created a special lift to get David in the plane so he could enjoy one last flight in his plane. David was so happy that day.
Kenneth Schrader. Ken was a lifelong farmer, and the John Deere tractor reflects both his love of farming and his love of the tractors that he owned. Lorna Starks. Lorna was a wonderful mother and a military wife. Her life was hard. She buried her husband early as well as 3 of her 4 children. She worked at Monarch Range in Beaver Dam during the war and built bombs. Lorna was a door greeter at Walmart at the age of 83. She worked hard and prayed hard. Her daughter Rose said, "I am very grateful to have been blessed with her as a mom." Toni Tronchese. Toni lived a big life and was a feminist when that word was still new. She broke the glass ceiling at Hunt Wesson Foods, where she became one of the first female vice presidents of research and development. Toni was an art lover, scholar, world traveler, entrepreneur, and the boss of her sisters. Her generous and fun-loving spirit lives on in the hearts of her loved ones. Gary Nelson. A beautiful mind lost to Alzheimer's. Gary loved people, especially his family, and they could count on him for anything. Gary's love for people made him a successful bar owner. He enjoyed getting to know people and being around them. Gary had a sweet tooth and loved to indulge it with cupcakes and anything else with sugar. He also enjoyed hunting, dogs, and football. Betty Hoyer. Betty's quilt square features her wedding bouquet. She loved roses and had an entire flower bed of them. Betty knitted, crocheted, needle-pointed, worked as a nurse, and had 3 grandchildren and 3 great-grandchildren. Laverne Wankey. Laverne was an electrician, a farmer, and worked at Kramer Cheese making cheese spread. He faithfully attended Mass on Sundays and was a veteran. He loved to garden and could fix about anything. He enjoyed traveling, bowling, listening to polka music, bird watching, especially cardinals, and playing sheep's head. He loved to eat popcorn and apples. Betty Anderson. Betty was artistic. She made jewelry, created mosaics, and painted china. She loved hummingbirds, and watching her hummingbird feeder brought her comfort during hospice.
Leroy Ebert. Leroy loved antique tractors and clocks. He owned an antique tractor that was his pride and joy. The wheels in the tractor represent the faces of the antique clocks he also enjoyed collecting. For a time, Leroy farmed, and the farm scene is reflective of that time in his life. Lois Bowen. Using wool pieces that belonged to Lois's mother, Lois's daughter rug hooked this quilt square that encapsulates the peace symbol with a rainbow. Lois was a woman ahead of her time, a member of the League of Women Voters. She was a pacifist and supported gay rights. The bright colors evoke the brightness of Lois's character that was influential and always noticeable. Lois longed for world peace. Florence Hauser. The greatest gift of all is family. Daughter Nancy gave this plaque to her mom, Florence, as this phrase truly summed up how she lived. She was all about family and was a worrier for her daughter and grandchildren, even into adulthood. Florence wanted everyone in her family safe and sound. Mary Fisher. This Celtic cross represents 2 things. First, Mary was very proud of her Irish heritage and was grateful to have traveled to Ireland. Secondly, the cross represents Mary's great faith. God was number 1 in her life. Her rosary lived under her pillow at Alden, and she held it in her hands, reciting the Hail Mary for weeks before she died. Adelgun Sinderman. The quilt square features a set of kitchen curtains and a heart with "I love you" in German. The names featured are what her friends called her affectionately. The square represents the essence of who she was, a loving mother who created a true home for her family, complete with good homemade food and a welcoming house she took pride in caring for. She loved her family and friends well, and this represents that love. Willard Scheffling. Willard loved to gamble. This is a picture of him winning big at a casino. Besides his love of gambling, Willard enjoyed many travels and 14 cruises with Nancy. According to Nancy, they had a good time during their 56 years of marriage. Thank you so much for joining us today. We feel so honored to have been able to share these cherished memories of your loved ones with you. We hope as you depart from this treasured space that you will continue to carry the gift of love you have received from your loved one and find yourselves continually wrapped in their memories as in a patchwork quilt. Go in peace.